Welcome to the channel. From flooded basements to dark figures, unexplained phenomena, and rumors of SS occult experiments, this Gothic documentary-style story reveals the chilling story of one of Europe's most mysterious buildings. During the Cold War, soldiers stationed in Celle, Germany, reported frightening paranormal phenomena in the new town hall. There are places in Europe that seem to hold on to the echoes of history, not just in stone and brick, but in something far deeper, something that lingers unseen. Among them stands a building in the quiet German town of Celle, a structure so imposing, so heavy with memory, that even today, few locals dare to speak of what truly happened there. It is called the WWII Rathaus, the New Town Hall. At first glance, it looks like any other relic of pre-war Germany, a towering red brick monument crowned with ornate windows and a steep roof, the kind of architecture that once symbolized civic pride and progress. But during the years of the Cold War, this building became the site of something far darker. British and German soldiers stationed there whispered of strange sounds in the night, boots marching across empty corridors, muffled voices speaking in German from sealed rooms, the faint echo of military parades that no longer existed. Some claimed to see shadows moving through walls, or faces staring from windows that were supposed to be boarded up. Others simply couldn't bear the oppressive weight of the place, and ended their lives before their service was through. Military authorities wrote it off as stress, isolation, or drink. But within the ranks, the story was always the same: the Rathaus was cursed. And that curse, they said, dated back to the final, desperate months of the Second World War. When American forces captured Celle in April 1945, they found the town in ruins, yet the Rathaus stood almost untouched. It was massive, with 5 levels above ground and 5 more beneath it. Those lower floors, however, were completely flooded. No one knew why. It was as if the heart of the building had been drowned on purpose. Rumors spread among the soldiers, that the SS had used the basement for experiments, or rituals, or something that defied explanation. Curiosity soon turned to horror when a team of U.S. Navy divers was sent below to investigate. 2 never returned. The third was pulled to the surface screaming about symbols carved into the walls, and bodies that were still moving in the dark. After that, the basements were sealed. Concrete was poured, reports were buried, and the building passed into British hands. But something inside it never rested. For decades afterward, soldiers stationed there would describe the same suffocating dread, the same footsteps, the same whispers from beneath their feet. And through it all, one question persisted, whispered in barracks and pubs, told only after dark: what did the Nazis leave buried beneath the Rathaus of Celle? It was April 1945, and Germany was collapsing. The once formidable Wehrmacht was retreating on every front, its cities reduced to rubble, its soldiers surrendering in droves. In the West, American forces were pushing deep into the heart of the Reich. The war was almost over, but no one yet knew what kind of darkness the victors would find beneath its ashes. On the 10th of April, the U.S. 84th Infantry Division crossed the River Weser and advanced on Hanover. The city had been bombed so relentlessly that nearly 90% of its center lay in ruins. Burned-out trams still sat frozen on twisted rails, church spires jutted from seas of broken stone. Resistance was token, half-hearted. For the German soldiers who remained, morale had long since rotted away. They were fighting ghosts of themselves. 20 miles northeast of Hanover lay a smaller town, Celle. It was unremarkable, a collection of quiet streets and medieval facades, home to roughly 40,000 people. Yet in its center stood something extraordinary, a vast red brick monolith known as the Nieuws Raadhuis, or New Town Hall. At the time, it was one of the largest freestanding brick structures in all of Europe. 5 stories towered above ground, and 5 more, it was said, descended beneath it. When the Americans entered Celle on April 12, they met no opposition. White flags hung from windows, fluttering in the cool spring air. Tired men in gray uniforms emerged from basements, hands raised, faces hollow. The war was done for them. But amid the quiet surrender, one building drew the attention of U.S. command. The Raadhuis had survived the bombings almost completely intact, a miracle, or perhaps a warning. It was the perfect place for a temporary headquarters, a place to house administration and troops. So it was occupied immediately. At first, everything seemed normal. The offices still smelled faintly of smoke and ink. Stacks of abandoned files lay on desks, their edges curled with damp. But then the engineers tried to access the lower floors. Every stairwell, every lift shaft, every entrance that led downward had been submerged. From the ground level, the black water shone like oil, perfectly still, stretching into darkness. No one could explain it. Why would the SS, in the chaos of retreat, take the time to flood their own basement? What were they hiding down there? The commanding officer of the division, Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, demanded answers. He ordered pumps, schematics, and personnel. And when none of it revealed a clear solution, he requested something else, something far more dangerous. 3 U.S. Navy divers were dispatched to Celle on April 15, their orders simple. Enter the flooded basements of the Raadhuis and report what they found. They had no idea that their mission would become one of the most whispered legends of the Allied occupation, a story buried beneath layers of silence and fear. The morning of April 15, 1945, was gray and heavy, the sky sagging low over Celle. A cold mist rolled across the streets as military trucks rattled to a stop in front of the Raadhuis. From the back stepped 3 men in dark navy gear, each carrying heavy cylinders and coils of hose, the sheen of their helmets dull in the early light. They were divers from the U.S. Navy's elite engineering corps, temporarily reassigned from operations on the WWII. Their orders were brief and strange: reconnaissance of submerged levels, town hall of Celle. Report structural anomalies. To them, it sounded like a simple survey. But when they entered the building and saw the flooded stairwell yawning before them like an open wound, their confidence faltered. The water was black, stagnant, and utterly still, so still that the lamps on the surface reflected back like eyes. A faint metallic smell hung in the air. No one could tell how deep it went. One of the soldiers on guard later recalled that when he looked down into that water, he could swear it seemed to breathe. A slow, expanding ripple, as if the building itself exhaled. The divers suited up in silence. Each was tethered to the surface by a thick rope, their lifeline, and carried a torch, though the light barely cut through the murk. A small crowd gathered as they prepared to descend. Officers whispered among themselves. No one knew what they were about to disturb. At 9:40 hours, Diver 1 slipped beneath the surface. Moments later, Diver 2, then Diver 3. Their lines went taut, then began to move slowly, rhythmically, as they navigated the submerged corridors. The radios crackled with short reports. Visibility poor proceeding down first corridor. Found doorframe, no obstruction. Then static. And silence. Minutes stretched into half an hour. Every so often, a faint tug on the rope signaled they were still alive. Then, at 10:15, the first rope went completely slack. The crew chief called out, tried to reel it back, resistance, then nothing. Moments later, the second line went limp as well. Only the third rope remained tight, vibrating slightly as if the diver below were pulling against something unseen. Panic rippled through the team. Orders were shouted, pumps fired up, spotlights aimed at the water. But no one dared go in after them. At 10:42, the last line began to thrash violently. The men on the surface braced and hauled with all their strength, and the diver shot upward, breaking through the water with a ragged scream. They dragged him onto the stone floor. His mask was shattered. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, his mouth working soundlessly, water pouring from his nose and throat. For several minutes, he convulsed, clutching at the air as if still drowning. When medics finally got him to breathe, he began to laugh, a thin, hysterical sound that froze everyone who heard it. He did not stop laughing for hours. Later that evening, once he was sedated, the man began to speak, in bursts, half-coherent, trembling. His account was recorded, though the transcript was said to have been destroyed years later. Fragments of it, however, survived in military rumor. He said the first level, beneath the Rathaus, was like a labyrinth of offices, doors hanging loose, furniture half-floating. Symbols had been carved into the walls, not scratched, but etched deep into the stone, circles, runes, and pentagrams drawn with a precision that unsettled him. On the second level, he found small rooms, cells, perhaps, and in each, the same mark painted in what looked like rust or blood. He reported hearing faint whispering, though he was alone. Then, he said, he reached a stairwell leading to the third level. That was where he saw them. Bodies. Dozens of them, seated upright in chairs bolted to the floor. Their uniforms, black, tattered, unmistakable, SS insignia. But their faces, he struggled to describe them. Some had mouths sewn shut, others had limbs missing, and several, God help him, had animal heads grafted to their shoulders. Goats. Bulls. One that looked like a wolf. He claimed they were not still. That in the faint beam of his torch, he saw one of them twitch. Its head turned slightly, as though following the light. That was when the water began to stir, not from any current, but from something moving behind him. He turned, and in that blackness, saw what he could only call a shadow within a shadow, a dark, cloud-like mass that seemed to breathe, to pulse. It moved toward him with impossible speed. He tried to swim upward, pulling at the line, but it followed, pressing against his back, dragging at his limbs. He felt something cold and sharp break across his leg, and then nothing but terror. He blacked out before reaching the surface. When he awoke hours later, his hair had turned almost completely white. The other two divers were never recovered. Their lines were retrieved, cleanly severed several meters below the surface, as if cut by something sharp. No one ever went down again. The next morning, the commanding officer ordered the flooded levels sealed. Concrete was poured into stairwells and corridors, turning them into solid tombs. Within a week, the Americans left Celle, and the British Army took over. The incident was quietly erased from all official reports, classified as an operational mishap. But among the men who had been there that day, the story spread like infection. Some swore the building had changed afterward, the air heavier, the shadows longer, the sound of dripping water echoing from behind the new concrete walls. For years, soldiers posted to Celle would whisper about the drowned SS, the thing that moved in the depths, and the mad diver who survived. Most believed it was a ghost story, a way to frighten new recruits. But those who'd seen the diver's equipment, the severed ropes, or the pale, trembling man with white hair, they never laughed. And though the water was long gone, the smell of it, cold, metallic, faintly sweet, never left the building. Some said it still lingers, even today. In the months that followed the German surrender, Celle changed hands quietly. The American forces withdrew eastward, leaving the region under British control. The war was over, but the new war, the Cold One, had already begun. By 1946, the British Army of the Rhine had transformed much of Lower Saxony into a network of garrisons, airfields, and intelligence stations. Among these, one building stood out for its size, its location, and its unsettling reputation. The WWII's Rathaus of Celle. It became headquarters for various administrative units, later used by the Royal Military Police and Signals Intelligence Divisions. The locals said the British chose it because of its strong structure and thick walls, though others believed it was because no one else wanted it. Even the townspeople avoided walking past it at night. They said they could still hear the faint hum of machines, the splash of unseen water, sometimes even the echo of voices speaking English, from inside the sealed foundations. Officially, those stories were dismissed. The British were practical men, they had no patience for superstition. But soon, even the most hardened soldiers began to notice things. At first, it was simple, a radio that flickered with static whenever someone mentioned the basement. Typewriters that jammed for no reason. Doors that locked themselves at night. Then came the footsteps. Guards on night duty would hear the sound of boots marching across the upper corridors, slow, measured, as if in formation. But when they checked, the halls were empty. The echo would continue even as they stood still, listening, hearts pounding. One corporal swore he heard an entire platoon marching through the main hall at 2 in the morning. When he opened the door, the sound stopped instantly, and his flashlight beam fell on wet footprints trailing across the tiles, leading nowhere. Reports accumulated, and were quietly ignored. The British command could not afford to be mocked by its own troops for believing in ghosts. So, instead, they explained it away: old pipes, bad wiring, stress. But some of the soldiers who had been stationed elsewhere in Germany, in Osnabrück, in Hamelin, in Belsen, said Celle was different. There was something in the air there, something that pressed on the chest and whispered in the mind. A heavy sensation of being watched, even in broad daylight. Men began requesting transfers for no official reason. A few, after returning home, refused to speak about their service altogether. In 1952, a young lieutenant named Edward Harker was assigned to the Rathaus. He was educated, confident, a rational man. He laughed when he heard the stories, until his second week on night duty. He wrote about it in a letter to his wife, later recovered from army archives. I was alone in the upper hall, inspecting the windows. I heard water dripping, but there is no water here, everything is dry. Then I realized the sound wasn't dripping down, it was dripping up. It came from beneath the floor. I crouched and placed my hand on the tiles, and they were cold, wet, as though something were moving under them. When I lifted my hand, the damp patch was gone. 2 days later, Lieutenant Harker was found sitting at his desk before dawn, alive, but unresponsive. He never returned to duty. Medical notes from the British Military Hospital in Hanover describe him as catatonic, eyes fixed downward, muttering indistinctly in German. He had never spoken the language before. The basement, by then, was long forgotten, or rather, deliberately erased. Blueprints ended abruptly at the ground level. Official maps of the Rathaus simply listed everything below as unusable space. But some of the older German custodians who worked there remembered otherwise. They spoke of a low hum that could sometimes be felt through the walls, as though machinery was still running behind the concrete. Once, when a power failure struck the entire town, witnesses said they saw a faint red light glowing from the cracks of one of the sealed stairwells. It lasted less than a minute. By the end of the 1950s, the building's reputation was well known across the British sector. Men posted there called it the Drowned House. To newcomers, it was a joke, until they spent a night inside. And by morning, none of them laughed. By the 1960s, the WWII's Rathaus had become more than a posting, it was a test of endurance. New recruits arriving in Celle quickly learned the unspoken rule: you don't talk about the building at night. Every battalion stationed there had its own version of the story, passed down in whispers between shifts. It always began the same way, with the sound of marching. There is testimony 1. Private William Bill Spencer, Royal Signals, 1963. He told, it was about 1:30 in the morning. I'd just come off guard duty and was cutting across the west corridor to the dorms. It's a long hall, echoing, high ceiling. Halfway through, I heard boots behind me. Not shuffling, not random, marching. 4 steps, pause, 4 steps, pause. Like drill. I turned around. Nothing. But the air felt thick, like fog you couldn't see. I started walking faster. The steps followed. I broke into a run, burst into the barracks. The others said I was white as chalk. They thought I was drunk. Then one of them went out into the corridor to prove me wrong and came back saying he heard it too. For weeks after that, men refused to patrol the West Wing alone. Officers threatened disciplinary action, but even they began taking detours. Testimony 2, Sergeant Harold Harry Lane, Royal Military Police, 1968. Here it is. We were called in after one of the German cleaners went missing. Frau Adler, her name was. She did the top floors during the day. One morning, her cart was found parked outside the east stairwell. Door wide open, light still on. But the stairs ended in concrete, sealed years ago. No way down. We searched the whole building, every floor. Nothing. The next day, one of my lads found her keys lying on the floor right in front of that same door. The metal was warm, like they'd been in someone's hand. The door handle, dripping wet. The woman was never found. Officially, she'd returned to Hanover. Unofficially, no one ever saw her again. Testimony 3, Corporal Simon Atwell, Royal Engineers, 1974. Simon told, we were running electrical checks in the cellar corridor, the part that wasn't sealed. The power kept cutting out for no reason. I had 2 men with me, one carrying the torch. About 20 minutes in, we came across a door that shouldn't have been there. Heavy steel, no handle, no markings. Looked newer than the rest. I knocked on it, just joking, and something knocked back. 3 times. Hollow, metallic. We thought someone was winding us up, so we got a wrench and tried to pry the lock plate. The metal was freezing cold, frost forming on it, even though the air was warm. Then we heard a sound from behind it. Like a long exhale. We dropped everything and ran. When the engineers returned later with their CO, the door was gone. The wall where it had been showed no sign of alteration, no seams, no metal. Just smooth stone. There was such a case, the Cold Room Incident, 1979. By the late 70s, British forces across Germany were scaling down, but Celle remained operational. A group of soldiers stationed there began calling one of the office suites the Cold Room, because no matter the season, it was freezing inside. Even in summer, frost would form on the window frames. The radiator pipes were functional, but heat never stayed. On February 17, 1979, an electrical fire broke out in that room. When firefighters entered, they found something they couldn't explain. The blaze had burned in a perfect circle, about 6 feet across. Everything inside the ring was charred to ash, papers, chairs, even part of the flooring. But outside it, the room was untouched. On the wall above the ring, the plaster had blistered away, revealing old brickwork underneath. And carved into that brick, clearly visible, was a symbol, an inverted triangle inside a circle, identical to one used by certain occult SS units during the war. The official report claimed an electrical fault. Unofficially, the room was sealed and never used again. Testimony 4, Lance Corporal David Crow, Royal Logistic Corps, 1982, his story. You could tell new lads right away, they'd always volunteer for night guard, trying to prove themselves. That never lasted. I remember one night clear as anything. I was on duty with a mate, Lewis. About 3 a.m., he starts saying he hears music, faint, like a gramophone. I told him to shut up, but then I heard it too. Some kind of old marching tune, echoing through the air vents. We followed the sound down the main stairwell. It got louder the lower we went. When we reached the landing where the basement used to be, it just stopped. Dead silence. Then something hit the other side of the wall, hard. Like a fist. Once. Twice. Then dragging. We ran. Later, when the maintenance team checked that section of wall, they found the concrete cracked, as if something heavy had struck it from the inside. Testimony 5, Sergeant Alan McCready, Intelligence Liaison, 1985, Alana's words. By the 80s, most of us didn't joke about the Rathaus anymore. It had gone from funny to wrong. You'd walk in, and the place just knew you. It watched you. My office was on the 3rd floor, overlooking the courtyard. Sometimes, around 4 p.m., I'd see movement below, figures walking in formation across the yard, heading for the rear gate. Always in pairs, always in step. But when I looked again, they'd be gone. I once managed to count 6 of them. Gray uniforms. Caps. I swear to God, they were German. That same year, the British Ministry of Defence quietly restricted overnight duty rotations at Celle. Officially, it was due to energy conservation. Unofficially, guards were no longer permitted to patrol certain corridors alone after midnight. There were also suicides. Between 1961 and 1987, 7 soldiers stationed at Celle Nui's Rathaus took their own lives. All of them were found in their quarters inside the building. None left a note. In each case, their personal effects were arranged neatly, boots polished, uniforms folded. Post-mortem reports mention a similar phrase, repeated by witnesses before each incident. They said they heard something calling from below. No evidence was ever found of foul play, yet the frequency of these cases caused quiet concern within command circles. A memo from 1986, declassified decades later, reads simply: "Recommend reassessment of facility use. Persistent morale and psychological issues among personnel stationed at Celle. Several report auditory hallucinations, water sounds, voices in German. Subject matter consistent with local folklore. Suggest transfer of administrative units to Hohn or Fallingbostel." But the move never happened. The final whisper, late 1980s. By the end of the Cold War, Celle's importance was fading. Berlin was changing, and the old ghosts of Europe were stirring in different forms. The Rathaus, however, remained the same. Guards still reported the smell of damp stone, and the occasional ripple of water along the floors. Sometimes, a light would flicker on in a sealed office, even when power to that wing was cut. One night in 1988, a group of soldiers leaving the building for a final posting swore they heard chanting behind one of the basement walls. Not words, exactly, more like rhythmic syllables, low and drawn out. When they pressed their ears to the concrete, the sound stopped and the wall felt warm. The next morning, engineers found condensation running down the wall's surface. It smelled faintly of salt water. By the time the British Army left Celle in 2012, the Nui's Rathaus had earned a reputation as one of the most haunted military sites in Europe. Officers, men, cleaners, and clerks, each had their own version of the same story. Different details, same dread. A building alive with echoes, where history itself refused to die. And through it all, the same question persisted, whispered even by those who'd long stopped believing in ghosts. What did they seal down there, and why does it still move? By the early 1980s, whispers surrounding Celle Nui's Rathaus had evolved into a quiet obsession among intelligence officers and historians. The building's lower floors, permanently sealed, became the subject of speculation, a modern legend of Cold War Germany. Some theorized the flooded basements were a cover for something sinister. Others suspected they were simply impractical remnants of wartime damage. But those who had served there knew the difference between structural anomaly and malevolence. Architectural historians note that Nui's Rathaus was monumental in scale, 5 floors above ground, 5 below. But certain features set Celle apart. The floor plan forms a subtle pentagram, visible only when plotted in full on a map. Stairwells to the basement were abruptly cut off, filled with concrete, as if to quarantine something rather than hide it. Decorative tie rods, ornamental spires, and window placements seem intentionally aligned with cardinal directions, reminiscent of ancient ceremonial structures. Such observations gave rise to the theory that the Rathaus was not merely a town hall, it was a ritualistic space, designed for amplifying unknown energies. During the Third Reich, the Schutzstaffel had a pronounced interest in the esoteric. Himmler, in particular, sponsored expeditions to remote locations. Antarctica, searching for hidden entrances to the hollow earth. Vienna, theft of the spear of destiny to channel mystical forces. Remote castles, experiments on dowsing, clairvoyance, and alchemical procedures. WWII's Rathaus, according to Cold War veterans, was one of several facilities where human experimentation intersected with the occult. Reports suggest that Jewish prisoners from Belsen were brought to the lower floors. There, under SS supervision, they were subjected to rituals intended to prepare their bodies as vessels for possession. Accounts describe mutilation, removal of limbs, substitutions of animal parts, intended to break resistance and increase receptivity to dark entities. While no official records confirm these atrocities, surviving testimonies describe symbols and etchings consistent with esoteric rites, pentagrams, sigils, and cryptic inscriptions along the walls. Flooded basements, containment or concealment. 2 diver incidents during April 1945 remain the most mysterious aspect of Celle WWII's Rathaus. Only one diver resurfaced, traumatized, incoherent, claiming to have seen corpses strapped to chairs, some with goat heads. Symbols etched into walls. A dark mass chasing him through the water. Historians have questioned the validity of these claims, citing wartime chaos and the dangers of submerged exploration. Yet the concrete-filled stairwells suggest deliberate action, either to prevent access to horrors below or to contain something that remained dangerous. Many Cold War soldiers interpreted the unexplained phenomena, marching ghosts, levitating beds, voices in empty rooms, as residual energy. Some theorists propose that the Rathaus itself had become a conduit, where spatial geometry, human trauma, and dark ritual intersected to produce a persistent haunting. Nazi gateway theories. In occult circles, Celle WWII's Rathaus is sometimes called a gateway. Its design and orientation resemble ritualistic diagrams found in SS manuscripts. The basement's multi-level structure could be interpreted as layers of a symbolic descent, or ritualistic journey into the underworld. Reports of water, darkness, and inaccessible chambers fuel speculation that the Nazis attempted to bridge dimensions, to open doors to unknown forces. One former British officer, speaking anonymously in 2009, claimed that soldiers were psychologically primed for these experiences. It wasn't just superstition. The building did something to your mind. You started to see things you didn't understand, hear things that weren't there. And the more you resisted, the stronger it became. This aligns with reports from Nazi occult experiments, techniques designed to alter perception, break willpower, and induce visions. Do you know the Cold War military secrecy? With NATO forces stationed at Celle during the Cold War, secrecy was paramount. British and German troops were instructed not to discuss the lower floors. Incident reports were heavily redacted. Any mention of supernatural phenomena appeared under terms like environmental anomalies or psychological stress events. Veterans recall that the base command discouraged exploration, rooms were locked, stairwells filled, and basement doors sealed with specialized concrete resistant to standard demolition. The secrecy fueled speculation. Soldiers referred to the building as the stone labyrinth, or the cage, suggesting both containment and inescapable presence. Himmler's obsession with the occult extended beyond mythology. He believed in resurrecting the dead as obedient servants. Alleged records indicate that certain SS units practiced ritual possession, combining physical mutilation with symbolic rites. The surviving testimonies of Celle suggest these practices may have been localized there, making the building a focal point of dark experimentation. Some argue that post-war experiences of soldiers, auditory hallucinations, moving shadows, and apparitions, were consequences of residual occult energy. Others claim these were psychological responses to a building steeped in trauma, centuries of architecture layered atop murder, fear, and death. Cold War veterans report recurring phenomena. Ghostly formations, figures walking corridors or across parade grounds, often German soldiers from World War II. Levitation, beds and furniture lifting several feet, only to crash down. Auditory anomalies, jack boots marching, indistinct German conversations, chanting from sealed areas. Light and temperature shifts, frost forming on window panes in summer, lights flickering inexplicably in vacant rooms. Psychological effects, depression, panic attacks, even suicides linked to specific areas. While skeptics dismiss these accounts, the consistency across decades, British, German, and American personnel, defies simple explanation. A building that remembers, whether by design or by consequence, Neues Rathaus had become something more than stone and mortar. Trauma seemed to imprint on the walls. Ritualistic architecture and historical atrocities merged with Cold War occupation to create a persistent psychic residue. Soldiers and civilians alike reported an oppressive atmosphere, as if the building itself was aware of intruders. Historians, military experts, and occult enthusiasts converge on several possibilities: psychological imprint, trauma, death, and occupation imprinted on soldiers' psyches. Occult residue, Nazi experiments created a lasting supernatural effect. Architectural amplification, the building's geometry, alignment, and materials focused unseen energies. Gateways to the unknown, lower levels may have been intended as ritualistic conduits. Combination of factors, most likely, all elements, trauma, secrecy, ritual, and architecture, intertwined to create a uniquely haunting site. What is certain is that Celle Neues Rathaus remains a locus of mystery, a building where history, horror, and legend meet. Even today, visitors report subtle phenomena, lights flickering, drafts of cold air, and the faintest echo of marching boots across empty halls. By the turn of the 21st century, Celle Neues Rathaus had become a symbol of rebirth. Its brick and stone facade, once a backdrop for wartime terror and Cold War paranoia, now gleamed under the autumn sun. Yet, beneath this outward appearance of civic normalcy, the building's dark legacy lingered. After British and German military forces vacated the premises in 2012, the town of Celle embarked on a restoration project. Portions of the building were repurposed to house local government offices, returning the Rathaus to its intended function. Certain wings were converted into a hotel, allowing the public to occupy rooms once reserved for soldiers and, before them, SS experiments. Modern safety measures, sealed basements, reinforced stairwells, and surveillance cameras, gave the impression that the building's haunted past was now a relic of history. Yet, staff and guests soon discovered that history refuses to be buried.